I expected a routine traffic ticket on that rainy night, but the officer had something far worse in store. An envelope that marked the end of my life as I knew it. The flashing blue and red lights reflecting off my freshly waxed hood were an unwelcome, familiar disco. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles already white, even though I hadn't been speeding. Not even close. It was 11 p.m., pouring rain, and I was only 3 blocks from my apartment after an exhausting double shift, stocking shelves at the warehouse. I just wanted my lukewarm shower and my bed. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to remember every single safety seminar, every diversity training video, every well-meaning but ultimately useless piece of advice my suburban white friends had ever given me about interacting with the police. Be polite. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Easy to say when you're not the one statistically more likely to see those flashing lights turn into something much, much worse. I waited. The rain hammered the roof like machine gun fire. I watched the silhouette approach through the smeared glass. A big guy, rain slicking his uniform, his face hidden in shadow by the brim of his cap. He stopped by my driver's side window, the beam of his heavy-duty flashlight stabbing right into my eyes, blinding me. "Evening, sir," the officer's voice boomed, distorted slightly by the downpour. "License and registration, please." I felt the familiar cold surge of adrenaline, not fear exactly, but hypervigilance. I reached slowly, deliberately, for my glove compartment. "Sure thing, officer. Just need to grab my wallet." He didn't move, didn't acknowledge my slow reach. Anger just kept the light drilling into my pupils. "Take your time, but keep your hands where I can see them." I pulled out my license first, holding it between my thumb and forefinger, extending it toward the slight gap where the window was rolled down about 3 inches. "Here's my license, officer." He took it, barely glancing at it before flipping it open and peering down at the photo. "Mr. Thomas Allen, correct?" "Yes, sir." He paused for an agonizingly long moment. That pause that stretches time until you're sure you've accidentally committed a crime in the last 5 minutes. Then he moved to the passenger side of my car, checking my registration. I could hear him muttering something to himself over the radiostatic, crackling faintly from his shoulder mic. "Sir, do you know why I pulled you over?" he finally asked, his voice less booming now, more cautious, as he returned to my window. "Honestly, officer, no. I was driving the speed limit. I checked before I left the warehouse. Your taillight appears to be out on the passenger side." I blinked. "Oh, I didn't realize. It must have just blown. I'll get it fixed tomorrow morning first thing." He nodded slowly, looking me straight in the eye this time, no flashlight. His gaze was unsettlingly neutral. "It's a moving violation, Mr. Allen, and since the roads are slick, I'm going to have to issue you a citation." I sighed internally. Great. Another $100 because of a cheap bulb. "Understood, officer. I accept responsibility." He stepped back slightly, pulling a small notepad from his utility belt. He scribbled something down, tore the page off, and walked back toward his cruiser. I watched him, expecting him to return with the ticket book. This was it. 5 minutes, maybe 10, and I'd be on my way, angry but free. But he didn't come back immediately. He went back to his patrol car, sat down, and I could see his silhouette leaning back. Not writing, just sitting there, staring at my car through the rain-streaked windshield of his own. 10 minutes passed. The rain intensified. My hands were starting to cramp on the steering wheel. I glanced at my phone, 11:25 p.m. I needed to be asleep by midnight if I wanted to function. Finally, he returned. He was walking slowly, deliberately, and he wasn't holding the familiar bright orange ticket book. He was holding a thick manila envelope, sealed, with official-looking government stamps on the back. My stomach dropped. That was not a traffic citation. He stopped beside my window again, but this time he didn't lean in. He held the envelope out, his hand flat and steady in the downpour. "Mr. Allen," he said, his voice utterly devoid of emotion, "I am issuing you a citation for the taillight, yes, but I also have official documentation here for you to acknowledge." My heart began to pound against my ribs, loud enough, I was sure, for him to hear it over the rain. "Documentation, officer." "What kind of documentation?" He just held the envelope out further. "You need to sign for receipt of these papers, Mr. Allen. Please step out of the vehicle so we can do this properly, away from the traffic. That command, step out of the vehicle, hit me like a physical blow. In this rain, in this time, getting out meant fully submitting. I hesitated, looking past him down the empty, slick street. "Officer, I really don't understand. Can't I just sign inside?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. He didn't raise his voice, but the absolute firmness in his tone made it clear there was no negotiation. "It's department policy for this kind of notification, Mr. Allen. Out. Now." Swallowing hard, I put the car in park, turned off the ignition, and opened the door, careful to keep my movements slow, deliberate, and completely visible. The cold rain instantly drenched my clothes. I walked around to stand beside him, the wind whipping my hair. He handed me the traffic ticket, a simple citation for the taillight, and then with his other hand pressed the thick manila envelope into my grip. "Sign here. Acknowledging receipt of both documents," he instructed, pointing to a line on the back of the traffic ticket. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pen. I scrawled my signature under the ticket acknowledgement. Then I looked down at the thick envelope in my other hand. It felt heavy, official. It had my name typed clearly across the front in block letters, and below my name in bold red print were the words, "Immediate action required." "What is this, officer?" I managed to whisper. "Is this a court summons?" He stared past me, focusing on the dark houses across the street. He seemed suddenly distant, like he was waiting for backup that wasn't coming. He took the pen back, snapped it onto his belt, and then, instead of returning to his car, he reached inside the envelope I was still clutching, somehow pulling out a second, thinner document without letting go of the main envelope. He held this thin white sheet in front of me. It wasn't a court notice. It was printed on cheap standard office paper, but the header was official police department letterhead, dated this morning. And the title, stark and undeniable, leapt out at me, even through the rain blurring my vision. It read, "Notice of immediate termination of employment and revocation of badge/access credentials." I felt the blood drain from my face. My stomach clenched so violently I thought I might vomit right there on the wet asphalt. Termination? But I work for the city sanitation department. I'm a route supervisor. What are you talking about? The officer looked at me then, and for the first time the neutrality was gone. His eyes were wide, full of a terrible, contained panic. He didn't look like an officer issuing a ticket anymore. He looked like someone delivering a death warrant. "Mr. Allen," he choked out, taking a half-step back toward his patrol car, abandoning the formal posture entirely. "I don't know what this is. I just pulled you over for a faulty light. But you need to understand, I was told specifically to serve this to the driver of this specific vehicle, at this time, and to wait for you to acknowledge it. I didn't even know what I was serving until I opened the secondary notification in my car." He fumbled for the door handle of his cruiser, his movements clumsy and sudden. He looked around wildly, as if expecting a SWAT team to descend from the sky. "Sign the termination receipt, Mr. Allen. Just sign it so I can go." I never wanted this assignment." My mind was reeling. Sanitation department? I'd been there 15 years, impeccable record. And this cop, clearly terrified, was serving me legal papers while giving me a traffic ticket. I looked down at the thin white paper in my hand, the termination notice, and then back at the thick manila envelope he'd forced on me. My fingers tightened around the manila pouch. I saw something else inside it now, something stiff and metallic, shifting against the paper. "Wait!" I shouted over the rain, adrenaline finally kicking in with the full force of confusion and rage. "What did you think you were serving me? Why are you so scared?" He was already halfway into his cruiser, slamming the door shut as if escaping a fire. He didn't answer. He just threw the cruiser into drive, tires screeching as he spun away, Alec leaving me standing, alone in the downpour, soaked to the bone, holding a receipt for a traffic ticket and a thick envelope that clearly spelled out my professional ruin. I ripped open the sealed manila envelope. Inside, under the notice of termination from the sanitation department, was another, smaller document, folded tightly. I unfolded it frantically, my eyes struggling to focus through the rain. It wasn't a legal document. It was a photograph. A grainy black and white security camera still. It showed me clear as day, standing near the loading dock entrance of the sanitation depot, shaking hands with a man I vaguely recognized as a known city contractor for questionable waste removal contracts. Underneath the photo, scrawled in hasty, almost illegible handwriting, were 3 words that made my entire world stop spinning. Whistleblower. Assets frozen. And then, from inside my car, where I'd left my running engine and my phone charging on the dashboard, a sound cut through the drumming rain, the piercing, unmistakable sound of a landline phone beginning to ring, a sound that hadn't been connected to my apartment for 3 years. It was coming from the passenger seat, and it was ringing insistently, like someone desperate to reach me before it was too late. The ringing was insistent, a high-pitched mechanical shriek that fought savagely against the noise of the storm. My heart hammered the rhythm of that unwanted call. Landline! I hadn't even given out my home number in years, preferring the anonymity of my cell. Who could possibly know that number, or why they would be calling my abandoned landline right now, in the middle of this torrential downpour, moments after I'd been served papers by a clearly terrified police officer? I stood frozen on the curb, the termination notice plastered against my chest by the rain, the grainy photo of my indiscretion burning a hole through my sodden clothes. The ringing continued, sharp and demanding. It was a sound of urgency, of finality. I knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that answering that call was the single most dangerous thing I could do right now. But leaving it unanswered felt like admitting guilt before I even knew the charge. With a surge of panicked energy, I bolted back toward my car, slipping slightly on the wet pavement. I scrambled into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut against the deluge, muffling the sound momentarily. The phone was indeed ringing from the dashboard, the ancient beige receiver vibrating slightly against the plastic. I didn't reach for it. I reached for my keys. I had to leave. Now. This entire stop had been orchestrated. The faulty taillight was the bait. That officer wasn't just enforcing the law. He was following orders, and he had been visibly relieved to get rid of me. Someone important, someone who knew about my contact with that contractor, had known exactly where I would be tonight. My hands shaking violently, I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times, and caught with a sickening sputter, then died. The battery was clearly too weak, perhaps intentionally drained before the officer arrived. The sudden silence, broken only by the relentless rain, was deafening. I stared at the dashboard. The phone kept ringing. A relentless electronic mosquito. This wasn't just about a faulty light or some hypothetical city corruption I might have seen evidence of. This was planned surveillance, a coordinated effort to neutralize me before I could speak. The termination notice was a distraction, a way to officially isolate me, rendering me unemployable and penniless. But the photo and the whispered words, whistleblower, assets frozen asterisk, that was the real meat of it. I looked down at the termination papers again, then shoved them deep into the side pocket of my door. I couldn't risk leaving evidence of having opened them here. The photo, however, I couldn't destroy. Not yet. I tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket. The phone finally stopped ringing, cutting off mid-ring with a sharp, electronic click. The sudden silence was even more unnerving than the noise. Whoever was calling had given up, or perhaps they assumed the message had already been delivered through the policeman. I leaned my head back against the headrest, rain dripping from my soaked hair onto the seat. I had to get out of here. I had to get to a place where I could think, where I could secure my financials, where I could contact the one person who might understand what was happening, my sister, Clara, 3 states away, who was a paralegal and hated the city council with a passion. I tried the ignition again. Nothing. Just a dead click. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The street was still deserted, dark and shiny with rain. If I ran, I could make it to the 24-hour convenience store 3 blocks away. I could use their payphone, call a cab, and get out of this neighborhood. But as I reached for the door handle, my eyes caught a flicker of movement across the street, near the darkened entrance of Mrs. Henderson's house, the elderly woman who always complained about noise but always left milk out for stray cats. A flash of light, too small to be a car's headlight, too quick to be lightning. It was a beam. Not a flashlight like the officers, but a thin, focused laser dot, momentarily reflecting off a metal surface nearby. It tracked across the pavement, paused directly on my driver's side window, and then, sickeningly, settled right on my chest. I froze, every muscle locked. That wasn't a random reflection. Someone was watching me from across the street, holding the beam steady. They weren't police. They were silent, patient, and lethal. They had allowed the officer to deliver the papers, waited for him to leave, and now they were waiting for me to make a move. They weren't interested in a traffic violation. They were interested in what was in the envelope. My mind screamed, "Run!" I snatched my jacket closer around me, my hand brushing against the metallic edge of the photograph tucked inside. I had to draw them out, or I had to disappear into the storm. There was no middle ground. I didn't open the door. Instead, I reached under my seat, my fingers closing around the heavy, cold steel of the tire iron I kept there. A cheap security measure I never thought I'd actually need. I gripped it tight, the metal already slick with condensation. I had a choice: stay in the dead car and wait for them to cross the street out, or make a break for it. With a sudden guttural shout to cover the sound of the door sliding open, I threw myself out of the car toward the shadow of the nearest oak tree, the tire iron raised, ready to swing at the unseen sniper across the street, only to realize, mid-stride, that the laser dot was no longer fixed on my chest. It had tracked my movement and was now focused, unwavering, directly on the heavy manila envelope I had left lying on the passenger seat. They didn't care about me right now. They cared about the proof I carried. And as I watched, mesmerized by the terrible focus of that red dot, I saw the faint, almost imperceptible shimmer of movement. Not from across the street, but from the alleyway directly behind my car, a figure emerging from the dense darkness, moving with a chilling, cheesy, professional speed toward the unlocked door of my vehicle, reaching for the papers I had just abandoned. The figure emerging from the alley moved with the predatory silence of something that knew it was being watched. It wasn't the clumsy hustle of a thief. It was the practiced glide of an operative. The laser dot, the intended distraction, was working perfectly, fixing my gaze on the passenger side, keeping me occupied with the threat across the street, while the real extraction team moved in from the blind spot. My blood turned to ice. The tire iron felt suddenly inadequate against this level of coordination. They weren't just trying to silence me. They were trying to reclaim the evidence before I could even process the first layer of the trap. I spun around, abandoning the tree cover, adrenaline overriding rational thought. I had to get back to the car. The man in the alley, tall, wearing dark, non-reflective gear, his face obscured by the hood of his slicker, was already reaching the open door. His hand was hovering over the manila envelope, the official termination notice already tucked precariously close to the incriminating photograph. "Hey!" I roared, the sound swallowed instantly by the relentless rain. I sprinted forward, slipping again but catching myself just before I fell. The operative didn't flinch. He didn't look up. He simply snatched the envelope, sliding it into an internal pocket with practiced efficiency, and then, instead of fleeing, he paused. He turned his head slowly, finally looking toward the source of my shout, looking right at me. In the brief, almost non-existent moment before he moved, I saw his eyes. They weren't panicked like the police officers. They were flat, cold, and utterly empty. He wasn't scared of getting caught. He was annoyed at being interrupted. And then, the laser dot across the street, the distraction, flickered once, twice, and vanished. The sniper had withdrawn, perhaps satisfied that the asset retrieval was underway, or perhaps realizing that a direct confrontation was now necessary. The man in the alley didn't run toward the darkness he came from. He moved toward the back of my car, circling around the rear, drawing something small and metallic from his belt. It caught the faint ambient light, and I recognized the silhouette immediately. A compact firearm. I was exposed, standing 3 yards from my dead vehicle, soaked, armed with a cheap piece of steel, and facing a professional who had just secured the evidence and was now clearly preparing to eliminate the witness. "Stay back!" I yelled, knowing how ridiculous I sounded. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He leveled the weapon, taking a steady stance despite the rain splashing against his frame. I knew I had milliseconds. Fight or flight. Flight was impossible. He had the only way out. The papers. I dropped the tire iron and dove sideways, aiming for the passenger door, hoping to get leverage or at least dive behind the bulk of the car frame. I didn't quite make it. As I slammed my shoulder against the car door, trying to pull myself into the driver's seat, I heard the first shot. It wasn't the loud, echoing crack of a rifle. It was a muffled thump-thump, the suppressed sound of a handgun. The first shot went wide, tearing a chunk of wet bark from the oak tree beside which I had been moments before. I scrambled inside, kicking the dead ignition key and trying to wedge myself against the door panel, using the car as pathetic cover. The second shot followed immediately. This one found its mark. It didn't hit me. It hit the dashboard, inches from where the telephone receiver had been resting. The thick plastic casing exploded outward in a shower of sparks and shredded wires. The noise was sharp and violent inside the metal shell of the car. My head snapped up. The phone receiver, jolted loose by the impact, tumbled off the dash and rolled across the floor mat, coming to rest near my foot. The operative was repositioning, moving around the trunk of the car, seeking a clearer angle for the killing shot. I knew I couldn't stay put. The car was a metal box, an easy target. I looked down at the debris field on the dashboard, shattered plastic, mangled copper wire, and then something else. Amidst the wreckage of my phone system, wedged tightly against the remnants of the speaker grill, was a small metallic object I didn't recognize. It was about the size of a thumb drive, sleek and black, but it wasn't a standard USB. It had a tiny, almost invisible antenna sticking out of one end. It must have been inside the casing of the old landline system, placed there by someone who knew I would be forced to answer that specific, desperate call. It was an emergency beacon or a listening device, or maybe something else entirely. The operative was now visible in my rearview mirror, stepping around the rear bumper, weapon raised, and eyes locked on my silhouette through the back windshield. He took a final, steadying breath. I grabbed the metallic device, its surface cool against my palm, and shoved it deep into my pocket alongside the photo. I didn't have time to examine it. I had to move. With a desperate surge of strength, I threw the driver's side door open directly into the operative's line of sight, not as a weapon, but as a blinding, unexpected shield. As the door swung wide, I threw myself backward out of the car, not toward the alley but toward the street, rolling hard onto the slick asphalt, ignoring the searing pain in my shoulder. I came up onto one knee just as the operative fired again. This time the bullet slammed into the door, ripping through the metal where my head had been seconds before. But the impact of the door swinging open had done something else. The force of the collision with the frame had triggered the car's ancient, faulty alarm system. A deafening electronic siren began to wail, cutting through the rain and the gunshot echo. The noise was chaos. The operative flinched violently, momentarily stunned by the sudden auditory assault in the enclosed space. That was my opening. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted into the middle of the rain-swept street, directly into the path of oncoming traffic that wasn't there. Away from the operative, away from the alley, toward the faint possibility of a passing car. A witness. Anything that could break the perfect circle of silence they had tried to enforce on me. I ran blind, gasping for air, the siren screaming behind me, my lungs burning, when suddenly, through the sheeting rain and the blare of the alarm, I heard another sound. Not a gunshot, not a siren, but the unmistakable heavy rumble of an engine approaching fast, too fast for the residential speed limit, and definitely not slowing down for the chaos unfolding on the street. Headlights cut through the storm, blazing white, and they weren't aimed at the operative in the alley. They were aimed directly at me, and the vehicle was massive, dark, and completely silent, except for that overwhelming engine roar. The approaching vehicle was a black monolith cutting through the storm, its headlights two blazing orbs swallowing the distance between us. It moved with a speed and purpose that defied the conditions, its massive engine tone a deep, resonant growl that overpowered even the shrieking car alarm I had accidentally triggered. This wasn't a civilian car. This was an industrial-grade presence, something built for intimidation. The operative, still recovering from the blast of the car alarm, finally broke cover from behind my derelict sedan. He saw the approaching threat, too, and his professional demeanor cracked. He turned, not toward me, but toward the source of the mechanical thunder, recognizing it as a far greater complication than a lone, exposed whistleblower. I didn't hesitate. If this massive truck was aiming for me, it was either a final, brutal attempt to silence me, or against all odds, it was an unexpected rescue. I sprinted diagonally across the street, throwing myself toward the only patch of cover, the high, overgrown hedge bordering Mrs. Henderson's property. The black vehicle didn't slow down. It didn't swerve. It barreled directly toward the spot where I had been standing moments before. I risked a glance over my shoulder just as the operative made his own desperate dash away from the impact zone, diving toward the alley. The truck hit the empty space with horrifying force. There was a deafening metallic crunch, not of hitting a person, but of hitting something heavy and solid. I heard the sickening groan of crushed metal, followed by the immediate jarring silence as the vehicle's engine cut out. The car alarm stopped too, as if the massive vibration had short-circuited everything electrical on my block. I hit the hedge, tangling myself in the wet, thorny branches, finally dragging myself down behind the thick base of the oak tree beside Mrs. Henderson's porch steps. My body was battered, my lungs screaming, but I was alive. And the immediate threat, the man with the gun, was momentarily neutralized by the sheer force of the second, unseen player. I pulled the small black device from my pocket, the one salvaged from the dashboard of the destroyed phone. It felt strangely warm now. I also clutched the photo, the proof of the meeting, the evidence of the conspiracy linking the sanitation department to illicit waste contracting. From behind the massive truck, a door opened, not with a bang, but with a heavy, hydraulic sigh. A figure emerged. This person was tall, but not bulky like the operative. They moved with an air of absolute authority. They walked directly toward the wreckage of my sedan, each stepping carefully around the deployed airbag that had apparently deployed when the truck hit something. Likely the operative's abandoned firearm, or perhaps the sedan itself, absorbed the main impact. The figure paused by my car. I expected them to search for the envelope, the one the operative had taken. Instead, they reached down and calmly retrieved something small from the ground near the driver's side wheel well, a small, silver flash drive. They didn't acknowledge the operative, who was now slowly pulling himself out of the alleyway, favoring one leg, looking furious but cautious. They didn't acknowledge me, hidden in the foliage. They simply turned toward the wreckage of the passenger seat, where the old landline lay mangled. The figure knelt, plucked the tiny, antennaed black device from the debris I had dropped, and tucked it carefully into a secure pouch on their tactical vest. They held up the silver flash drive, the contents of which I could only guess were the real assets frozen by the unknown entity that had ordered my termination. Then, this person, my savior, or perhaps my new jailer, finally looked up, surveying the scene. The disabled car, the stunned operative limping out of the alley, and the soaked, terrified man hiding in the bushes. They didn't move toward the operative. They walked directly toward my hiding spot. "Thomas Allen?" The voice was calm, modulated, and distinctly feminine, cutting through the lingering silence. I pushed myself up slightly, adrenaline making my vision tunnel. "Who are you? Where is my job? What about those papers?" The woman stopped just short of the hedge. She wasn't wearing a police uniform or tactical gear. She wore a simple, high-collared black coat, and perfectly dry despite the downpour. She looked less like an enforcer and more like a very powerful CEO. "Your job is terminated, Thomas. That was necessary collateral to flush out the corruption chain at the depot. The operative was an external recovery agent, sent to retrieve the wrong evidence, the envelope containing the termination notice and the photo. He was sloppy. He assumed the threat was the traffic stop." She gestured toward the small black device now safely stored on her vest. "The device you picked up? That was your contingency. A direct emergency line to people who aren't the people who tried to freeze your assets. The agency that put you in that position needed proof you were being targeted by a third party before they could officially intervene." She paused, letting the implications sink in. "You were clean, Thomas. You stumbled upon something bigger than sanitation fraud. That contractor you met? He was running encrypted communications through city fiber optics. You were about to report that independently. They panicked. They framed your termination notice as the immediate problem to force you into the open. hoping their recovery team got everything before the real cavalry arrived. She offered me a gloved hand. I am Agent Reyes. My organization ensures that when legitimate whistleblowers are compromised by bad actors within city systems, the actual evidence, the hard data, doesn't disappear. We needed you to be served the termination notice, but we needed you to survive long enough to bring this out of the chaos. She tapped the pocket where I had tucked the grainy photograph. That photo confirms the identity of the primary conspirator. The flash drive I just recovered confirms the breadth of the data breach. You sign nothing for the police, Thomas. You walk away from that car, and you come with me. We have a lot to discuss, and you have a new job now. One where you might actually be able to sleep at night knowing your pension isn't tied to the city's compromised network. She stared directly into my eyes, the rain finally beginning to ease to a drizzle. The choice is simple, Thomas. Stay here, get arrested for assaulting a federal agent, and trust me, that operative is about to get very chatty with local law enforcement about that broken taillight. Or take my hand, step into the vehicle that just saved your life, and help us dismantle the entire network that tried to bury you. I looked back at the wrecked sedan, the flashing lights of the patrol car that would inevitably arrive soon, and the limping operative who was now eyeing me with pure venom. Then I looked at Agent Reyes, offering a lifeline in the eye of the storm. I pushed the photo deeper into my jacket, feeling the small warm lump of the recovered device against my ribs. I took her hand. Her grip was firm, professional, and reassuringly cold. "Where are we going, Agent Reyes?" She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Somewhere dry, Thomas, and somewhere very, very secure. Welcome to the cleanup crew." She pulled me gently from the bushes and guided me not toward the monstrous black truck, but toward a much less conspicuous, dark sedan that had been parked silently down the street, its engine idling, waiting patiently for the signal.